Watch someone fall in love. Really watch them. And somewhere around the third or fourth week, something shifts. Not in a dramatic way, not a fight, not a betrayal. Just a quiet withdrawal. A text that takes longer to answer. A reason to be busy when things were going beautifully. And if you ask them what happened, they'll tell you they don't know. And the strange thing is, they're telling the truth. Maybe you've watched someone do this. Maybe you've been the one who does it. The one who goes a little cold right after something warm. The one who somehow always ends up alone. Not because nobody shows up, but because you make sure nobody stays. Here's what nobody talks about. It's not selfishness. It's not immaturity. It's not that you don't want love. It might actually mean you want it more desperately than most people do. What's happening is quieter than that, and older than that, and far more logical than that. Your nervous system learned something early. It learned that closeness leads to loss. That vulnerability is the setup for pain, and it has been protecting you from both ever since. So efficiently, so automatically, that you never even knew protection was what it was doing. This isn't a video about being bad at relationships. It's about something much deeper, about why so many people who are capable of great love find themselves unable to let it land. By the end of this, you'll have a name for the pattern, and that naming, just that, will already start to shift something. There's a concept in psychology that explains more about adult relationships than almost anything else. And most people have never heard it explained in a way that actually makes sense of their own life. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by researchers like Mary Ainsworth and Sue Johnson, isn't just about how babies bond with caregivers. It's about how the nervous system gets wired, early, before language, before conscious memory, to understand what closeness means, whether it means safety or whether it means danger. When you grow up with caregivers who are consistently present, attuned, and responsive, you develop what researchers call a secure attachment. Closeness becomes associated with comfort. Vulnerability feels survivable. You learn in your body that reaching out brings connection. But when early caregiving is inconsistent, absent, emotionally unavailable, or frightening, the nervous system learns something different. It learns that getting close is risky, that needing someone is dangerous, and so it builds systems of protection. Not consciously, you didn't decide any of this. The wiring happened before you had words for it. And here's the paradox that changes everything once you understand it. The people most afraid of intimacy are often the ones who want it most desperately. The avoidance isn't indifference, it's the opposite. It's a service system so alert to the possibility of loss that it would rather never fully arrive than risk being left. Stay with me here, because this is where it gets important. These patterns aren't character flaws, they aren't destiny, they are adaptations. They made sense once, and understanding when they were built and why is the first step to deciding whether you still need them. There's one sign in particular that almost no one recognizes as a sign at all. I'll get to it. But first, let me walk you through what fear of intimacy actually looks like from the inside. In behavior, most people have never connected to this pattern. The first thing you might notice, and this is the anxious avoidant core, is a persistent, low-level terror of being left. Not always a conscious terror. Sometimes it shows up as hypervigilance, reading into silences. Waiting for the thing that's good to prove it was never real. And underneath that fear is a strategy so old it feels like instinct. Leave before you're left. End things when they're good so you never have to find out what happens when they go bad. Push just hard enough that the other person pulls away first, so the ending feels like their choice, not your wound. This is the leave before you're left logic, and it runs silently in so many people who describe themselves as unlucky in love. The leaving isn't random. It's timed perfectly, just as real closeness becomes possible, because that's when the risk becomes real. Here's the sign that almost nobody names: the pattern of falling for people who are emotionally unavailable. Not once, repeatedly. The married person, the emotionally shut down person, the person who is very clear they don't want a relationship. This gets written off as bad taste or bad luck. But there's a different explanation, and it's actually a kind of unconscious intelligence. When you choose someone who can't fully show up, you get to experience the feelings of wanting connection without ever having to risk the full exposure of actually having it. You can yearn, you can pursue, you can feel the ache of almost love, and you never have to find out what happens when someone truly knows you and chooses to stay. That's the part that's terrifying. And unavailable partners make sure you never have to get there. And connected to this, there's the pattern of flakiness, of disappearing. Not in dramatic, obvious ways, but in the small retreats that follow moments of genuine closeness. You have a conversation that goes somewhere real, a night that feels vulnerable and true, and then something, a need to create distance, suddenly busy, slower to respond. A low-key withdrawal that you might explain as needing space, but that happens specifically after closeness, not before it. This is the nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do. Closeness triggered the alarm, so the system retreats to a safe distance. It isn't manipulation, it isn't game playing. It's regulation, the only way the nervous system learned to feel safe again. Then there's something subtler, and in some ways more isolating. When someone offers you care, something in you resists it. The compliment deflected before it can land. The help declined before it's even fully offered. The "I'm fine" that arrives so quickly it couldn't possibly be true. Someone reaches toward you with warmth, and you find yourself stepping back, not because you don't want it, but because receiving it feels stranger than needing it. More exposing, more dangerous somehow than the longing itself. This is what it looks like when care has been associated with conditions. When warmth, early on, came with strings, or didn't come at all, you become easier to love from a distance than up close, better at giving than receiving. And the loneliness of that, of standing in the middle of care and still feeling untouched, is one of the quietest griefs of this pattern. There's a version of self-sufficiency that isn't health, it's armor. An insistence on not needing anyone, not asking for help, handling everything alone, not because it's efficient, but because needing someone is the most vulnerable thing you can do. And vulnerability was the thing that hurt you. Independence can be a gift. It can also be a fortress. And the difference, the one that matters, is whether you could ask for help if you needed it. Whether you could say, "I'm struggling," and let someone actually be there. If the thought of that makes something in you tighten, that's worth sitting with. Perfectionism, the relentless standard, the inability to be seen struggling, confused, imperfect. On the surface, this looks like ambition, or high standards. But perfectionism as emotional armor works like this. If I am flawless, if I am competent, if I never let you see me fail, then you never have access to the real me. And if you never have access to the real me, you can never really reject me. You can reject the performance, and that hurts. But it doesn't touch the core. The defended self stays safe. The problem is that it also stays unknown, unseen, and the loneliness of being admired for a curated version of yourself, while the real you watches from behind the performance, is its own kind of loss. Now here's something that rarely gets named as part of this pattern at all. Ask someone with a fear of intimacy how they're feeling, and they'll often give you a thought. Ask them what they need, and they'll give you a plan. Not because they're avoiding the question, but because, somewhere along the way, the internal language of emotion went quiet. Psychologists call this alexithymia, the difficulty of identifying and describing emotions. You can't share what you can't name. You can't ask for what you don't know you need. And so intimacy, which requires emotional language, becomes a conversation you don't have the vocabulary for, not because you're closed off, because the dictionary was never given to you. And then there's busyness, the calendar that's always full, the work that always needs more. The way achievement can become a flight from emotional life, not because the work doesn't matter, but because being in motion means never having to be still enough for someone to get close. For many people with avoidant patterns, Work becomes a socially sanctioned form of avoidance. It's rewarded. It looks like ambition. Nobody questions it. But functionally, it keeps the nervous system out of range of the one thing it learned to fear most: real closeness, real being known. Underneath all of this, underneath the independence and the perfectionism and the businesses and in the walls, there is often a belief so old it doesn't feel like a belief at all. It feels like a fact. The belief is this: I am not quite enough, not quite lovable enough to be chosen, not quite worth the staying. It didn't arrive as a conclusion. It arrived as an experience. Repeated, early, wordless. And so you've been earning your place ever since. Achieving, performing, self-sufficing, never asking for too much. Naming this, not as truth, but as a very old, very understandable misunderstanding, is one of the most important things you can do. Subscribe if you want to stay with this, because what comes next is the part most people never connect to this pattern at all. Now, the sign almost nobody recognizes. The one I mentioned earlier, unconscious sabotage. This is the pattern that destroys what you most want to protect. The relationship that was going well, genuinely well, until you did something that made no sense. Started a fight from nowhere. Pulled back so hard the other person finally gave up. Disclosed something you knew would be too much, too soon. Made yourself too available, and then panicked at their response. This isn't self-destruction for its own sake. It's the nervous system running a familiar calculation. Things are getting real. Real means vulnerable. Vulnerable has always meant eventual pain. Better to cause the ending than to wait for it to find you. The sabotage is the protection. It just comes too late in the story, when something genuine was actually possible. Here's where I want to offer you something that might feel like the ground shifting slightly under your feet. You have probably spent years with a story about yourself, that you're just not a relationship person, that you're too independent, that you're bad at love, that some people are wired for deep connection and you are simply not one of them. Those are not character traits. They are adaptations. Every single one of them was built in response to a real experience of loss, of unavailability, of emotional danger, in a time when you had no other tools. Your younger self made the only logical choices available. The protection was intelligent. It worked. You are not avoidant. You are protected. You are not cold. You are defended. You are not unlovable. You are untrained in safety, which is a completely different thing. Attachment researchers use the term earned security to describe something that used to be considered impossible. The idea that people who didn't receive secure attachment in childhood can develop it in adulthood. Not automatically, not easily, but through relationships with partners, with therapists, with friends that consistently show the nervous system something it never had the chance to learn. That closeness doesn't have to end in loss. That vulnerability can be met with care. That being fully known and fully chosen at the same time is actually possible. The nervous system is not a fixed thing. It is a learning system, and it can learn new patterns. What got wired in can, with patience, with support, with enough safe repetition, begin to rewire. This is not a promise that it's easy. It isn't. The pull toward old patterns is strong, and it doesn't disappear the moment you understand it. Understanding is the beginning, not the finish line. But here's what's true. Awareness changes the game. When you can watch yourself start to pull away and know, I'm not actually in danger, this is the pattern, something becomes possible that wasn't possible before. A choice, a pause, a different move. You have been running a protection system that was built for a version of your life that no longer exists. The threat it was designed for is gone. The people you learned not to trust are not the people standing in front of you now. And you get to, slowly, imperfectly, with help, start teaching your nervous system the difference. If this landed, if somewhere in these signs you found a word for something you've been living but couldn't name, I want you to leave that word in the comments. Not because it helps the algorithm, but because naming it out loud, even in a small way, is part of how this starts to change. You are not broken. You are wired for a world that is no longer the one you're in, and that, finally, actually, can change.